So good evening dear students, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu news analysis. So today is 7th November 2024 and today we have some important articles for the discussion. And before discussing that, today we have one important prelims practice question. The question is, economic depression is best defined as a period of which of the following? So the options are: option A, stagnation in the economic growth; option B, negative economic growth rate; option C, prolonged slowdown in economic growth rate; and option D, high unemployment rate even in growing economy. Right, so this is very important question and easy question, so easy to moderate level question. So try to answer this question. So even if it goes wrong, there's no problem, that at least try to attempt this question and try to answer this question in the comment section, and we'll be providing you the correct answer in the next class. Right, so apart from this, we have some important articles for the discussion in today's class, and one by one we'll try to discuss all these important articles. And the first article, which is given in the Hindu newspaper, it is about Trump 2.0, what Trump 2.0 means for India. So we all knew that in recent elections in US, so Mr. Donald Trump has emerged as victorious, and he's going to become the president of America for the second term. And what does it really means for India? So we will be covering different dimensions of Donald Trump's administration, and how Donald Trump's US presidency will impact India-US relations in a broader manner. Right, so we all knew that Donald Trump returned to the White House as the president of United States of America, and there are number of questions about how his second term will shape US foreign policy, because US foreign policy is very important for India, because during Donald Trump's regime, so USA has announced its Indo-Pacific policy, right, recognizing the key and important role that India can actually play. Right, so in this context, it is very important that how US foreign policy can shape India-US relations in coming years. Right, so in fact, when we look into the Trump's foreign policy, Donald Trump's foreign policy always emphasizes on America first policy. Even if you look at his first term, so he won the elections and he came to power calling America first policy. Right, so in fact, the second term also emphasizes on America first policy. Therefore, it has been suggesting that this next term could be marked by a more pronounced isolationism. Right, so America first is considered as a protectionist measure. Right, so it is very often known as a protectionist policy of USA under Donald Trump. So protectionism is opposed to globalization. So when Donald Trump says America first, it means isolation of US. And in fact, so when we talk about Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US President Donald Trump, there's always a warm rapport. Right, so that is clearly visible in Donald Trump's last term. So there was a meeting called Howdy Modi and Namaste Trump meeting. Right, so therefore this Howdy Modi and Namaste Trump meeting between the Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US President Donald Trump in the previous term, so promises a unique diplomatic foundation between India-US bilateral relations. And in fact, this rapport or this bond between the two leaders of US and India could prove pivotal as they steer relations between the world's oldest and the largest democracies. So we all knew that India is known as world's oldest democracy, and in fact America calls itself as a world's oldest democracy, but India is world's largest democracy. And good relations between oldest democracy and the largest democracy are always very important and very significant for global peace and stability. And in fact, India-US partnership and diplomatic relationship is known as a friendship of consequence. And why it is called as friendship of consequence, so we'll try to understand that perspective as well. And when we talk about India and US relationships, so this relationship always emphasized on policies which aimed at business innovation, particularly USA under Donald Trump and India under Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So these two leaders always emphasizes on business innovation, deregulation and economic development. So these are the core aspects of the India-US relationship during the Prime Ministership of Modi as well as US President Donald Trump. And in fact, under the leadership of these two leaders, India and US can potentially drive a significant changes on the global economic stage. And that is very important, because one thing that you need to understand is that India is now the 5th largest economy, right? So India is 5th largest economy on the global stage, and India wanted to become the 3rd largest economy very soon. So because of that reason, India's close and friendly ties with US is very important, because US could provide a lot of technology for India, and USA is also a potential source of investment. And in this context, the return of Donald Trump as the president of US is very important for India. And in fact, both India and US are always motivated by a common interest. Now, what are the common interests that these two countries have? And when we talk about the common interests, I have just emphasized that India is currently the 5th largest economy, and India wanted to become the 3rd largest economy very soon. And in this drive of India to become the 3rd largest economy, US could play a very important and pivotal role. And apart from that, USA also wanted to maintain its global hegemony. And because of this reason, USA has also been looking for a reliable allies to counterbalance China's growing influence. And in fact, the deep alliance between Modi and Donald Trump, US President Donald Trump, can further, impact or further strengthen not only economic ties between these two countries, but also it has a lot of strategic importance as well, right? So particularly when we talk about the strategic alignment between these two countries, so one thing that we need to stress on is Indo-Pacific strategy of these two countries, as well as the counter-terrorism, because India is a country which has been always facing the threat of terrorism from its eastern neighbor as well as the western neighbor, and strong support of USA to counter terrorism is very important for India to establish peace and stability in the region, and also to counter Chinese aggressive and assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific region. And in fact, so we all knew that India is located in a strategic place or a strategic location in the Indian Ocean, and India's influence in recent times has also been growing, and India is also able to withstand Chinese pressure and Chinese withstand. So in this backdrop, these two leaders could further amplify each other's strength, and they can create a ripple effect across the other alliances also. So therefore we could say that this is going to be a good beginning in flourishing of India-US ties. So however, the India-US ties, particularly under Donald Trump, is not free from the challenges. Now, what kind of a challenges? For example, trade rivalry or trade war between USA and China has also impacted US and India trade as well, because Donald Trump very often adopted a stance on reciprocal taxes, right? So he always emphasizes on reciprocal taxes, and because of that reason, trade between India and USA is always a delicate issue. It is always a delicate matter. And in fact, India's tariffs on certain US goods, right? For example, India imports a lot of US goods, right? So India has been imposing higher tariffs on the goods which are being imported from US. So this is one of the long point of contention between Trump and India, right? So in fact, Donald Trump very often calling for more equitable trade practices between these two countries. So he has been emphasizing time and again for reciprocal taxes, as well as equitable trade practices, and that is one way or the other would create challenges between India and US trade. However, when it comes to increasing tariffs on Indian goods exported to US, that could challenge industries like information technology, pharmaceuticals, textiles. So they are heavily relying on US markets. However, so if Donald Trump pushes for decoupling from China, so if he wanted to decouple American industrial and manufacturing bases from China, so in fact this was the stance of Donald Trump during his previous term, right? So this was part of his previous economic strategy, and this decoupling from China would potentially benefit India, because most of the US manufacturing companies or manufacturing bases would be relocated out of China as part of China plus one strategy. This China plus one strategy will certainly benefit India, so because it could draw more US investments into India's manufacturing sector. So there will be a robust growth in India's manufacturing sector. So if Donald Trump further continues the decoupling of the manufacturing bases from China. And another area of cooperation between India and US is defense and security in the Indo-Pacific region. So this is also a very important dimension, because it could build capacities of India when it comes to dealing with potential aggressors like China in the Indian Ocean, and it also plays a very important role in the Indo-Pacific region, particularly ensuring or achieving the goal of free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. And in recent times, India-US defense ties have grown significantly. So especially, if you look at the relations, particularly the defense and technological relations between these two countries, there are certain initiatives such as critical and emerging technology initiative, right? So that is initiative on critical and emerging technology, and other major deals were signed by these two different countries. So that help both these countries to achieve the common interests and the shared objectives that these countries have. And apart from the initiative on critical and emerging technologies, so remember that this is very important, you may get question on the initiative on critical and emerging technologies. So under Joe Biden's administration, so there was a defense agreement which is between the General Electric and Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, and this agreement between General Electric and Hindustan Aeronautics Limited will enable the production of jet engines in India and other key collaborations, and that further strengthen India's defense capabilities. And in fact, India's strengthened defense capabilities will also benefit USA as well, because in recent times China has been challenging US hegemony in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond. So therefore, India's strengthened defense capability will help USA counter China in the Indo-Pacific region through India. So therefore, the defense cooperation is very important between these two countries. And apart from that, when we talk about the military cooperation between these two countries, by enhancing military cooperation, US and India can jointly address China's assertive policies in the larger Indo-Pacific region. And in fact, so these two countries have the commitment to ensure free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific region, and that goal can be achieved by further enhancing military cooperation between these two countries. And another important dimension where India and US can work together under the Trump's administration of America and under prime ministership of Modi. So a robust India-US counterterrorism partnership under Donald Trump could exert a diplomatic pressure on nations harboring terrorist groups. So particularly when we talk about the countries which have been harboring these terrorist groups, we should talk about Pakistan, right? So Pakistan is a country which has been supporting terrorism, particularly the cross-border terrorism against India, and USA under Donald Trump could exert diplomatic pressure on countries which have been harboring the terrorist group, so thereby further enhancing India's overall security environment as well. So ensuring the peace, security and stability in the region, and that is in the benefit of India. So under Donald Trump, we could see that there will be a friendly India-US relations, right, going ahead. So because a previous term also, Donald Trump's administration will always beneficial for India, and this term also we could expect that India and US would further come together. And the next article is about the recent Supreme Court's judgment on upholding the UP Madrasa Act. So we will understand what is this madrasa. So we'll understand what is madrasa and what is this UP Madrasa Act, and what are the key provisions of this UP Madrasa Act, and why the Supreme Court upheld UP Madrasa Act, what the Supreme Court has said about this UP Madrasa Act. So we'll try to understand this in a broader manner. So first and foremost, we'll try to understand the context. The context is that recently the Supreme Court stated that minority institutions such as madrasas. Now when we say madrasas, so these are the minority educational institutions. Minority educational institutions, right? So they are minority educational institutions, right? So in fact, these minority educational institutions have the right to provide religious education, and they can also handle their own administration under Article 30 of the Indian Constitution, right? So Article 30 of the Indian Constitution emphasizes on the right of minorities, to establish and administer the educational institutions of their choice, right? So in fact, the Supreme Court has stated that the minority educational institutions such as madrasas have the right to provide religious education. That means they can provide religious education, and they can also handle their own administration under Article 30. So remember that Article 30 provides right to the minorities to establish and administer educational institutions of their choice. Now we'll try to understand very briefly what are the views of the Supreme Court on this. So then we'll deeply discuss about this. Supreme Court on Tuesday upheld the constitutional validity of Uttar Pradesh Board of Madrasa Education Act 2004. So it is also known as Madrasa Act. Remember that you may get question on this particularly, so mains question as part of Gender Studies paper 2. So therefore it is very, very important, and the Supreme Court has stated, or it has upheld the constitutional validity of Uttar Pradesh Board of Madrasa Education Act 2004, or it is also known as Madrasa Act, barring the provisions relating to higher education. And in fact, the Supreme Court in the very same judgment has also overruled the previous Allahabad High Court's earlier ruling, and in fact the Allahabad High Court's previous ruling on the Uttar Pradesh Board of Madrasa Act 2004 as as a violation of the constitution, because it has been violating the principle of secularism, right? So earlier Allahabad High Court has held that the Uttar Pradesh Board of Madrasa Education Act 2004 is violation of the principle of secularism, and because of that reason this legislation was struck down by the Allahabad High Court. But later a petition has been filed to appeal on the judgment of the Allahabad High Court, but the Supreme Court has given a different interpretation of this act, and in fact the Supreme Court has upheld this legislation. And now we will try to understand what is a madrasa. So when we talk about the madrasa, so madrasas usually provide both religious education in Islamic tenets and practices as well as mainstream secular education, right? So this is what is known as madrasa. So madrasa is a minority educational institution because it provides both religious education in Islamic tenets as well as practices and even mainstream secular education. So these two types of education is provided by these madrasas. And in fact, the Madrasa Act passed by the Uttar Pradesh state legislature provides a legal framework for these institutions in UP. So under this legislation, madrasas have got the legal framework, right? So there is a proper legal framework on how these institutions need to function. So therefore, this Madrasa Act provided a legal framework for them. And in fact, the Madrasa Act has established Uttar Pradesh Board of Madrasa Education, and which prepares and prescribes course material and conduct exams for all courses across all madrasas in the state of Uttar Pradesh. And in fact, this particular legislation, that is the Uttar Pradesh Board of Madrasa Education Act 2004, also gives the power to the state government to create rules to regulate madrasa education, right? So it can also create, right? So for example, the state legislature has passed the bill. It has passed this legislation, and therefore it has also empowered the state government to create rules to regulate the madrasa education in the state of Uttar Pradesh. However, as we have discussed that Allahabad High Court earlier struck down this legislation because it is violating the principle of secularism, right? So we'll try to understand this in a detailed manner. This year 2024 March 22, the Allahabad High Court struck down the Uttar Pradesh Madrasa Act, right? So it has entirely struck down this act, saying that this act has been violating the basic structure of the constitution, as this law has floated the principles of secularism, right? So this has floated the principles of secularism, and because of this particular reason, the Allahabad High Court has quashed or struck down this legislation. So we all knew that in Keshwanand Bharati versus State of Kerala case, the Supreme Court has come up with the basic structure doctrine, right? So what is the basic structure doctrine? So basic structure doctrine emphasizes that the parliament can amend any provision and any part of the Indian constitution, provided that it has not it has not altered, it has not impacted the basic structure of the Indian constitution, right? So parliament cannot alter the constitution's basic structure in Keshwanand Bharati and State of Kerala case. So this is what the Supreme Court has held that. And another important judgment which is very, very important, that is SR Bommai versus Union of India judgment of 1994. And in this judgment, the Supreme Court has included secularism as part of the basic structure doctrine, right? So secularism is going to be the feature of the basic structure doctrine. So therefore, parliament cannot amend secularism, or parliament cannot take away secular nature of the Indian constitution through a constitutional amendment. And in fact, this Allahabad High Court also stated that this Madrasa Act has also violated the right to free and compulsory education under Article 21A of the Indian Constitution. So Article 21A talks about the right to education, right? So it is talks about right to education, and Allahabad High Court also held that this Madrasa Act is also the violation of Article 21A, that is right to education. Now, why did Supreme Court uphold the legislation, right? So what is the reason that the Supreme Court has upheld the act, right? So it is a decision which is contrary to the Allahabad High Court. So in fact, Supreme Court set aside the High Court's verdict on three main grounds. What are those three main grounds? The first ground is basic structure test is not needed. Supreme Court has clearly said that for this Madrasa Act, for this legislation, basic structure test is not needed because it is not a constitutional amendment. It is not a constitutional amendment, rather it is just an ordinary legislation, and because of that reason the basic structure test is not needed. However, this test has been taken by the Allahabad High Court. Secondly, the Supreme Court also held that state can even regulate the madrasas, right? So as long as the regulation by the state governments are reasonable and rational, states can regulate the aspects of education of minority institutions, but make sure that these regulations of the state government should not violate Article 30 of the Indian Constitution. Now, Article 30 of the Indian Constitution talks about what? It talks about the right of minorities to establish and administer their educational institutions, right? So states' regulations should not violate Article 30. And in fact, the Supreme Court has held that this Madrasa Act does this without depriving the educational institutions of the minority character. So that is how the Supreme Court has ruled. And apart from that, the Supreme Court has held that right to education and the minority institutions. So in 2014, Supreme Court heard a challenge to the constitutionality of Article 21A, and as I have already told you that Article 21A talks about right to education, right? So it has been part of the fundamental rights since 2010, and the court held that right to children to free and compulsory education Act 2006, or it is also known as RTE Act, must not apply to minority institutions as it may destroy the minority character. And in fact, minority educational institutions are protected by Article 30 of the Indian Constitution. So therefore, the Supreme Court has clearly held that the minority educational institutions, particularly madrasas, never violated the Right to Education Act of Children, Article 21A. So that's how the Supreme Court has taken a different interpretation of the earlier judgment of the Allahabad High Court on the Uttar Pradesh Madrasa Act. So I hope you have understood this article. And the next article is the PM Vidya Lakshmi scheme. So we'll try to understand what is this PM Vidya Lakshmi scheme in a very detailed manner, in a broader manner, because this is very important from prelims perspective. The context is that recently Union Cabinet has approved PM Prime Minister Vidya Lakshmi scheme. So you just have to remember Prime Minister Vidya Lakshmi scheme. So what is this Vidya Lakshmi scheme? So the Vidya Lakshmi scheme objective is to provide financial support to the meritorious students, right? For example, it provides educational loans or financial support to the meritorious, so financial support to the meritorious students to pursue their higher education. So therefore, it will improve the gross enrollment ratio in higher education, right? So that is the objective, because financial constraints are the reason which have been making a lot of students drop out from higher education or not even enrolling into the higher education. So we'll try to understand some basic features of the PM Vidya Lakshmi scheme. And in fact, so when we talk about this scheme, it is a central sector scheme. Remember that this is not a centrally sponsored scheme, this is a central sector scheme. And under this PM Vidya Lakshmi scheme, so any student who gets admission in quality higher educational institutions, so they will be eligible to get collateral free, guarantor free loan from the banks and other financial institutions. So this means under PM Vidya Lakshmi program, the government ensures that the meritorious students will get collateral free loans from banks and other financial institutions that will help students pursue higher education, fulfill their dreams. However, this PM Vidya Lakshmi scheme will be administered through a simple, transparent and a very student friendly system, and that will be interoperable and even entirely digital. And in fact, so it will be applicable to the top quality higher educational institutions of the nation, as it is determined by the National Institutional Ranking Framework. And it will be applicable for all higher educational institutions, and in fact it is also applicable for government, private, so that are ranked within the top 100 in National Institutional Ranking Framework in overall category specific and domain specific rankings. And in fact, this list will be updated every year using National Institutional Ranking Framework. And when we talk about the particulars of the loan which is being provided to the students, meritorious students under PM Vidya Lakshmi scheme, so for loan amount of up to 7.5 lakh, the student will also be eligible for a credit guarantee of around 75% of outstanding default. Right, so the government will ensure the credit guarantee of 75% of the outstanding default, and this will ensure that the banks will provide educational loans to the students. Right, so banks will be ready to provide educational institutions when government provides credit guarantee of up to 75%. And in fact, in order to ensure that every meritorious student will receive these educational loans, the Department of Higher Education will have a unified portal which is PM Vidya Lakshmi. On this portal, students will be able to apply for the education loans as well as the interest subvention through a simplified application process to be used by all banks. And apart from that, payment of interest subvention will be made through e-voucher and central bank digital currency wallets. So remember, all these details are very important for your prelims examinations, right? So you have to remember. So the interest subvention for the beneficiaries under the PM Vidya Lakshmi scheme will be made through e-voucher and central bank digital currency wallets. And the next important article is Mahasagar Initiative. So in this article, we will try to understand what is this initiative and what is the objective of this initiative and who launched this initiative. And recently, the third edition of high level virtual interaction, which is known as Mahasagar, right? So which is known as Mahasagar, that was recently conducted by the Indian Navy. So who conducted this? Indian Navy has conducted this third Mahasagar initiative. Remember that we also have the Sagar initiative, right? So what is Sagar initiative? Security and growth for all in the Indian Ocean region. So when we talk about some details with respect to the Mahasagar initiative, so as part of this Mahasagar initiative, so who organized this? Indian Navy organized this. So the maritime heads for active security and growth for all in the region. So that is what is known as Mahasagar. So as I have already told you, Saga means security and growth for all in the region. However, Mahasagar means maritime heads for active security and growth for all in the region. So that means vast ocean in the in Hindi. Right. So in fact, Mahasagar is Indian Navy's flagship outreach for high-level virtual interaction among all the leaders. And in fact, the initiative called Mahasagar is started by the Indian Navy, and in fact, it is conducted annually. And in fact, so it is conducted once in 2 years. And in fact, it has garnered a wide acceptance among the participating nations ever since its inception in the year 2023. However, a number of countries in the Indian Ocean, Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea are being part of this Mahasagar initiative, right? So the participating countries included Bangladesh, Comoros, Kenya, Madagascar, Maldives, Mauritius, Mozambique, Seychelles, Sri Lanka and Tanzania. So all these countries are key security partners for India, and they are the participant countries in the Mahasagar initiative. And in fact, during this current edition, the principals candidly dwelled on the imperatives of quality training and opportunities for training, collaboration between Indian Ocean littoral towards developing requisite capacities, capabilities, and skilled manpower to tackle various maritime security challenges. And when we talk about the maritime security challenges, maritime piracy, right? So maritime piracy is one challenge. Trafficking, terrorism. So all these challenges, right? So adequately equip these countries, build the capacities of navies of these countries to deal with the challenges, new challenges in the Indian Ocean region. And apart from all these articles, today we have one important mains practice question, right? So this question is based on news articles, and it is also based on the syllabus topics which are being given, and this is very important for the gender studies paper 3 of UPSC mains examination. So the question is, give an account of land degradation in India and also highlight the steps taken to check the growing land degradation in India. Now, so this question is about land degradation that has been taking in India. And in fact, so when we talk about the land degradation, so climate change and other anthropogenic factors are the key factors which have been the driving factors of the land degradation. And so every question has an approach. Now when you divide the question into multiple parts, it will be helpful for you to structure this answer in an effective manner. So what should be the approach of the question? So when we talk about the approach, first and foremost, you need to introduce the question with some data on land degradation in India. And then you need to mention the causes of land degradation, and then discuss steps which are being taken to address land degradation in India, and ultimately you need to conclude the answer with an appropriate way forward. So as I have already told you that in the introduction you should give some data on the land degradation status in India. It is always advisable and it is always better to suggest a right data from a report. The State of India's Environment Report 2017. So it has calculated that nearly 30% of India has been facing the degradation or desertification, right? So 30% of the total geographical area in India has been facing the threat of desertification, and this figure could even touch 40 to 70%, and that could further threaten India's food security, particularly in states like Rajasthan, Delhi, Goa, Maharashtra, Jharkhand, Nagaland, Tripura, and Himachal Pradesh. So in all these respective states, the land degradation or desertification could touch anywhere between 40 to 70%. So what are the causes of land degradation, right? So there are multiple causes which are responsible for the land degradation. So particularly when we talk about the causes, so 30% of the land degradation in India has been taking place because of the deforestation, overcultivation, and the grazing practices, cattle grazing practices, soil erosion, and depletion of wetlands, as per a 2016 study by Space Application Centers of the Indian Space Research Organization. So these are the main factors which have been contributing for the land degradation and desertification. And when we talk about the other factors, other causes of land degradation, so the agricultural production system, particularly the unscientific agricultural and irrigation practices, so they are also responsible for the land degradation along with the loss of biodiversity as well. So apart from that, there are certain natural factors such as climate variability and extreme weather events, and they are also responsible for the land degradation. And apart from that, overgrazing and overgrafting, inappropriate irrigation, urban sprawl, and commercial development and soil pollution. So these are the main factors which are they are majorly responsible for the land degradation. So make sure when you write the answer, you stress on all these different reasons in an effective manner, and you could also write some data along with these points and some examples as well to make your answer more and more appealing and interesting. And there are certain steps that must be taken to check the growing land degradation in India. So what steps needs to be taken? So in order to fight in order to prevent or arrest the land degradation. So India will convert degraded land of nearly 50 lakh hectares to fertile land in the next 10 years between 2021 to 2013. And apart from that, a center of excellence would be set up in Dehradun for land degradation neutrality. So land degradation neutrality's objective is this. Okay, so India will convert the degraded land of nearly 50 lakh hectares to fertile land in the next 10 years. And there's also another challenge which is also known as Bond Challenge. And this Bond Challenge is an effort at the international or at the global level to bring around 150 million hectares of the world's deforested and degraded land into restoration by 2020 and 350 million hectares by 2030. And apart from that, there are also schemes like Soil Health Card Scheme. So farmers, as part of the Soil Health Card Scheme, will be provided with a scientific assessment card of their field soil, and this will help in mixing right amount of the fertilizers to ensure fertility of the land. So farmers will not will not use excessive amount of fertilizer, because excess amount of the fertilizer will also make the soil less suitable for the cultivation over a period of time. And micro irrigation is very important because the unscientific irrigation methods very often driving the degradation and desertification of land, and therefore the micro irrigation methods, particularly the drip irrigation and sprinkler irrigation, would be more and more effective. And in fact, the government has also established the micro irrigation fund under the NABARD to help states adopt the micro irrigation, particularly drip and sprinkler irrigation. So in conclusion, what you can write: so the land degradation and desertification has been increasing, so there is no doubt about that, but it can be reduced by proper management of mining processes using advanced technologies rather than the conventional unscientific methods. And in fact, the agricultural intensification needs to be managed properly to reduce the environmental impacts, and that can be done through the education of the farmers, right? So that is how you can write the conclusion, and you can also suggest some other measures as part of this answer. And that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. So if you like our work, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.